things like this. That's how people got by when seasons didn't allow. Now, yeah, if you're in a tropical area where it's warm all the time, you got growing season all the time, that's a different thing. But most of us don't come from ancestors that spent, the last 20,000 to 50,000 years around the equator. So what happens is that our ancestors, and I'll say from great-grandparents and before, they were all what, instead of being a sugar burner, having their metabolic system running off of glucose, they were fat burners. They ran off of stored body fat and ketones. And it wasn't until we radically changed, because before pre-1980, about 40% of our calories were coming from natural fats, historical fats, the type of fats that we had been eating for millions of years as a species. Then, over the last 40 years, we suddenly got mistakenly spooked on saturated fats, animal products, and started doing all of these incredibly industrialized, what we call vegetable oils, but they're actually seed oils. And the amount of hydrogenization and everything that industrially has to happen to take these seeds and turn them into a liquid it's just toxic. And the bleaching that they have to do and the deodorizing that they have to do to make it something so that, these were things that actually, if you go back through history 120, 130 years ago, as we, had cotton plantations, they had to throw the seeds away while they were clogging up riverbeds, and they couldn't just get rid of them, so they turned them into lubricants for the steam engine and other industrial processes of the day. And it wasn't until a couple of years later that they're like, we can form something that you and I would call Crisco, and give it to people and replace butter and grease and lard and stuff like this. And it became so incredibly profitable because it was so cheap to make. But it's where we started really poisoning our food system. That, and around 1900, we started smoking. And it wasn't really until 2 world wars where all of the GIs were sent overseas with packs of cigarettes as part of their K rations and everything that we turned all of adult males into smokers. And then women's lib movement came along and said, well, hey, here you go, Virginia Slims. You can be just as tough as the guys. And we got them all going with it as well. But combination between the pollution going on, between the smoking coming into our bodies, and between all of these vegetable oils, and no longer the protective saturated fats. The reason why it's called saturated is not that it's saturated with something bad. It just means there's no double bonds. There's 2 hydrogens for every carbon atom. And it's unsaturated or unsaturated fats that are unstable, and that's why they're liquid always. You can put vegetable oil in the refrigerator and it's never going to, like lard, turn to a solid. Whereas beef tallow, like McDonald's used to use until we thought that was bad and evil for you, that's what French fries used to be fried in. It wasn't until we went to vegetable oils and then had a 36-ounce Coca-Cola with it and wound up determining that it's not the beef on the bun that's the problem, it's the bun itself, because we've changed our wheat crops over the last 50 years. There's so many things that have happened that became a perfect storm that took, you just look at the Woodstock videos out on YouTube and images of that, and here you've got 100,000 kids in a farm field in New York, and they're all running around in midsummer during a pandemic, by the way, that was going on. if you go back and do research, did you actually post that yesterday, or was that another one of our friends that posted that?
I did the Hong Kong
yes.
flu, and I remember that too, not as a kid, but I do remember that term and all that. That is very familiar at that time.
So, but you just look at the pictures of that era from the late 60s, early 70s, and we didn't have obese kids. We didn't have we barely had obese adults at that point in time. And it's not until the government got in charge of creating a food pyramid and guidelines, and now 1 in each kid from high school age younger, from 18 to 6, 1 out of every 5 is already pre-diabetic. We used to call type 2 diabetes adult onset because you didn't get it till your 50s, 60s, or 70s, or at least pre-diabetes until you're kind of hitting 60s.
Yeah.
And now 1 in 5 school-age kids is already pre-diabetic because of all of the processed crap that they're being fed at home and at school. Then you go to the next generation up, the 19 to 35-year-olds, and 1 in 4 of that population is already pre-diabetic. So we're kind of aging our youngest generations and poisoning the hell out of them with what we're doing, with how we've evolved and changed in the last 40, 50 years. And thank God the medical world's starting to catch up to this. The American Diabetes Association came out in 2019 and finally realized that, oh my God, not only did they incorporate fasting as an approved guideline for how you nutritionally treat and a way of eating, as they would call it, the disease, but low carb and very low carb came out not only as approved frontline treatment patterns of how to battle this while eating, but those 3 are the ones that are anticipated to actually get people off of drugs, off of insulin, and most doctors who have been treating, which is most doctors, type 2 diabetic patients, because so much, 2/3 of the population is pre-diabetic or diabetic already. They have never seen somebody come off of meds and off of insulin, whereas now there's companies like Virta Health out there, which is out there doing that, and and they actually have a business model that says, here, Mr. Employer, we're going to take all your type 2 diabetics and we're going to turn them into non-diabetics. And you don't pay us for the ones that we don't turn into non-diabetics. And it's all with eating and just eating a proper diet, like how we used to eat, like our great-grandparents and the thousands of generations before them all ate. My mantra is, if it comes in a box from the middle of the grocery store, in a box or a bag, and it has an expiration date on it, if there's more than 5 ingredients in this thing, and if sugar shows up as number 2 or 3 in the list, it's just low-grade poison that will get you eventually. And
we get used to it. We get used to it because what's going to happen to people once you move away from that? If I have I'd used to occasionally have one of those Gatorade non-sugar drinks, I get a headache immediately from that stuff. Once you live away from that, you will not go back because you'll do it and you go, why did I eat those chips? I do not feel good. That's what eventually does happen. When your body changes,
absolutely,
you change. And you were talking about employers. Diabetes is a disease of tired. You're exhausted. People don't think. They think it has something to do with losing weight. Weight is a part of it, but the disease itself is you're exhausted. You wake up, you're like, oh my God. But what happens is when you got 300-400 sugar running all the time, your body gets used to it. See, that's the other thing, that state of being that your body takes over. Once you are actually out of course, you don't really know how far out of course you are because you're still kind of maintaining. But once you take it down and go on a whole nother level, I had 2 bananas today and an egg. That's it, baby. And we're staying on that. I'm hungry, but that's kind of where I run. You'll stay there. Because if you pack it in, you won't feel well, and then I got a job tomorrow. I got a radio show to do. I got a substitute job. I got to be on my game. That's why employers, and that's why you want to do it. And that's why I do it, because I have to. Or I couldn't teach. Or I couldn't do this. I'd be exhausted.
Well, there you go. So, it's just understanding, before we knew anything about diet nutrition, we were healthy and we were thin. Then we started learning things about diet nutrition, started putting exercise gyms on every 4 corners, 4 of them in every town, and suddenly we have weight problems. And some of that is that, there's the Coca-Colas of the world that create health information, or more like disinformation campaigns and organizations across the world, because if people really understood what happens every time that, even if you're drinking let's call it a diet soda, or even a soda now with stevia, which is a natural non-sugar beverage, it's still, because we've talked about sugar, and that by always riding that roller coaster of high blood sugar, high blood sugar, high blood sugar, well, the body has to push that sugar out of the bloodstream because otherwise we'd go into a sugar-induced coma. And so insulin spikes up because that's what our pancreas, our beta cells create to move that out of the system. Well, what happens is that the way you become insulin resistant is that when you're always running chronically high glucose, you have to always be running chronically high insulin. Now, both of them are needed, and a regulatory, insulin's a regulatory hormone. It's something that we need, but you want it in low levels. There's many things that are toxic at high levels, but are completely essential and needed at low levels. And insulin's one of those things. And your body has two energy sources. You can argue three. You could say that the body can run off of glucose and things that metabolize to glucose, which is every carb. Then there are fats. Your body can burn fat. You can take fat and break it down and turn it into ketones. And historically, that's how our bodies ran most of the time. And then there's protein. Now, the reason why I say two main energy sources, you can argue a third, because protein can get broken down. It's very metabolically expensive. It takes a lot that if you have both low sugar and low fat in your diet, let's say you're just doing whey protein powders and kind of living off of that, well, your body will break that down and so that you can, instead of taking your stored body fat and having the liver turn it in through gluconeogenesis into some glucose, but mainly into ketones, and you're running off of those, it just, you're as your insulin's high all the time, it turns off your fat cells from being used. So you can only push in, so your body can run either off of glucose predominantly at any given time, or off of ketones. But because most people are spiking their insulin, and that's where I was going to. I'm sorry, I got a little turned around getting into this. But when you're drinking that stevia or that diet soda, it still is spiking your insulin, even though you don't have the front end glucose spike to go with it. So it still winds up, even though you're sitting here saying, well, I'm not putting sugar, I'm not putting calories into my body. You're not, but you're spiking your insulin, which is not allowing you to pull from your fat stores, which is where you want to be getting your energy, and become metabolically flexible so you can go back and forth. And that's where my weight gain came from, is that because I had high glucose all the time, I also had high insulin. If you have high insulin, you can't be burning your stored body fat. Once you change what you eat and go back to eating as our great-grandparents did, suddenly you become metabolically flexible again. You can return to having a real clear thought pattern. People say, oh my God, the mental fog got lifted because the body and the brain is craving the ketones. And you suddenly come off of that every 3 hours, oh, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, yep. Which is what makes fasting incredibly easy, because overnight, we all naturally fast. That's just something that we do because you can't sleep without fasting. But there's something called the dawn effect. The body kicks in and the liver starts cranking out, kind of with the circadian rhythms of the sun coming up and the sun coming down and everything. We are very hardwired from a body standpoint and a hormonal standpoint. The body starts cranking out some glucose right away. So when you wake up, you can kind of be happy, get going, and you got all the energy that you need to go do what you need to do. And once you're always running off of these ketones, your focus, your mental clarity, you don't crash, you've got energy all day long. And all of a sudden you start realizing it's lunchtime now. I didn't eat breakfast because I didn't feel like I wanted any. And I'm sure you read in my document, who was it, Tommy, that told us that breakfast is the most important meal of the day? Do you remember that in there?
Oh, that was a Wheaties box, wasn't it? That's what I was trying to think.
Yeah, more specifically, it's Kellogg's Corporation.
That's right.
So,
see, I got it.
Kellogg's Corporation.
Yeah.
They came out with that, and if you understand the history of Battle Creek, Michigan, where they came out of, and the cereal growers, or I shouldn't say growers, the cereal manufacturers, the people who were creating cereal. I mean, there's an incredible history behind why John Harvey Kellogg created cereals and grains and wanted people to go on these types of